All right, as we move into the Protestant Reformation, we kind of have to take a step back and remember what you just learned before we go forward. This class kind of builds, sorry. Please remember the definition of humanism and how important personal choice is to humanism. Also, remember that with humanism, education is extremely important, because one of the ways that you make those choices and improve your situation is through education. Now, the Protestant Reformation is a religious argument that changes the way culture and secular power, non-religious power, is viewed and works from the time of the Protestant Reformation, from the 1600s to our time period now. Now, in order to understand what's going on with the Protestant Reformation, we've got to take a look back at both some social and religious factors. So we're going to take a look at the background of the Protestant Reformation before we actually get into what happens and how it impacts art and culture. We have to start with the Roman Empire. Now, I know, some of you are looking at this map going, wait a minute, Rome? That was like the last class. That's not a long time ago. That's not even something we need to know. Well, actually, you need to remember the Roman Empire, because the Roman Empire sets the standard for a lot of things. Now, when you look at the map, you're going to see that the Roman Empire, at its height, was an absolutely massive country. It owned what we would think of as modern Europe, the Middle East, and the northern coast of Africa. And the Romans held power for almost 1,000 years. The problem was, Rome began to decline, it began to fall apart, it decayed from the inside out, as its internal structures, its principles, its patriotism declined and began to fall apart. Now, as that happened to the Roman Empire, Rome withdrew from the northern coast of Africa and from Europe, basically telling them, hey, guys, you're on your own. And when that happened, the power shifted away from Europe. Rome became a new empire called the Byzantine Empire. And its range of power and influence went from what you see on this map to what you see on this map. Now, that's a big difference. Instead of owning everything around the Mediterranean, the Byzantine Empire, centered in the city of Constantinople, over there on the northern tip of Turkey, that new Byzantine Empire was much smaller, much less powerful in some ways. And the power becomes focused over there. In doing that, of course, in withdrawing, Rome gives up its empire, and it becomes the Byzantine Empire, centered on Constantinople. With that shift in power, there comes a new balance between West and East. The city of Rome was traditionally the center of Christian religious belief. That was where the center of the Roman Empire was. That was where Constantine had originally set up the center of communication for the empire. And now there were two centers, one in Rome and a second center in Constantinople, creating a strange balance of power between the two. That question of where the center of religious power was became incredibly important because, like I said before, you have to remember, during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, the center of life, the stable part of life, was actually religion. It was not something that was just at the edges of people's thought. It was at the center of their belief, the center of the way that they viewed the world. In a scary time period like the Middle Ages, in a time period with very little science, like the beginnings of the Renaissance, the church created a set of organization, and they created a set of standards. Now, this set of standards incorporated all sorts of things that we don't think of today. For example, their science was actually considered beneath or inside the domain of the church. Science was not separate or in opposition to faith. It was actually a part of faith, because the belief was that God created all things, and therefore doing science would lead one back to God. Now, with religion at the center of life, the organization of religion was very, very important. When Christianity supposedly started, Jesus was the head, he was the leader, it was his ideas that founded Christianity, and everyone followed those ideas. However, after his death, those ideas of Jesus's were continued on and incorporated, taught, and carried on by his immediate followers, a group of guys called the apostles. Now, those apostles were the leaders. They were the ones who brought Jesus' message to others. They were the ones who wrote down the stories that Jesus told. And they were the ones who were given the authority and respect because they were the ones that had been closest to Jesus. That passing down of authority from Jesus to the apostles, and then from the apostles to other trained individuals in charge of leading local churches, is what we call apostolic succession. But beyond apostolic succession, there's one other question of leadership in the Christian church that is going to become absolutely central during the Protestant Reformation. That question of authority refers to the Bishop of Rome, also known as the Pope. Now, the question of the Pope centers around the idea throughout the Bible that Peter seems to be one of the ringleaders or the heads of the apostles, these guys who follow Jesus. Now, Peter often seems to be the one who asks the questions, the one who answers the questions. He seems to be the talkative one. And there is one place in the Bible, in Matthew chapter 16, verses 18 and 19, where Jesus looks at Peter and he says, I say unto you that you are Peter. Now, the word for Peter in Greek, which is the language the New Testament was originally written in, it was written in Greek. The word for Peter in Greek is Cephas, which means rock or stone. So Jesus says, I say unto you that you are Peter, Cephas, a rock, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it, and I will give unto you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatsoever you bind on earth will be loosed and bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. The reading of this verse was interpreted to mean that Jesus, talking to Peter, using the Greek name for Peter, Cephas, as a rock, when Jesus says, upon this rock I will build my church, he was appointing Peter a central role in building the church. Because of those verses, the church taught that Peter was the one who had founded the church in Rome, and that Peter was the one who had inherited the call, the responsibility from Jesus to run the Christian church. They take the idea here that whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven, and apply that specifically to Peter, giving Peter the keys to the kingdom of heaven. That concept of Peter receiving that authority from Jesus to be the head of the church, and Peter passing that on to the next bishop of Rome, and so on and so forth, is what we call the Petrine succession, which is a variation on the apostolic succession. The idea here was that Peter was the first bishop of Rome, aka the first pope. All popes trace their power and authority back to Peter, and supposedly through Peter to Jesus. The crossed keys on the papal flag down there at the bottom left are a symbol of the Pope's power to be in charge of the gates of heaven. If you've heard old jokes, you know, guy dies and he goes to heaven, and the gates he meets St. Peter. And when he gets there, Peter says, well, those jokes start with this concept. It's the idea that the Bishop of Rome actually is the first Pope, the one who has the great power and authority over church, the one who has the right to have a say in how things are run in the church, and who speaks with the authority of Jesus, the authority given to Peter. Now, where does this all get started? There is, of course, the Bible verse, but there are also two early church councils. The Council of Nicaea in Canon 6 writes, "Let the ancient customs in Egypt, Libya, and Pentapolis prevail, that the Bishop of Alexandria have jurisdiction in all these, since the like is customary for the Bishop of Rome also." This declaration, written in 325 AD, seems to imply that the Bishop of Rome is a regional authority, much like the Bishop of Alexandria is. He doesn't seem to be given any special authority here in 325 in the Council of Nicaea writings. However, in 381 at the First Council of Constantine, the writings actually declare Constantinople the new Rome, gives the Bishop of Rome the seat of honor in church council, and gives the Bishop of Constantinople second place. Again, emphasizing this balance between Rome and Constantinople, and seeming to imply in 381 that the Bishop of Rome does indeed have a special power or authority in his region.